the first time I've worked on the truck with a camera pointed at me. It's kind of nice. Working by myself. It's like I got somebody to talk to, which is really kind of weird because there isn't. It's just a damn camera. Blinking red light on a little ass GoPro. That's better. So, where were we? I installed the skids a couple days ago. It went pretty well, and I had a few thoughts I wanted to pass on. Took some notes, because what generally happens if I don't, and I start talking into this damn camera, is I just kind of wander on and on and on, and then later on I look at what I said and none of it was what I needed to say or wanted to say. So let's see if taking notes will help me. Thoughts about the skids themselves. First, by the way, we're talking about the RCI skids. Steel, I went with the steel instead of aluminum. I thought about aluminum, chiefly because of the weight, and like a lot of us, when you start hanging a bunch of stuff off the truck, it starts getting really heavy. Yeah, I went with steel instead of aluminum. Thoughts on that started with aluminum because, as I was saying, weight savings. When I considered it, though, just the nature of aluminum, I get on the skids pretty hard fairly often. If my last truck was any indication, I got on the skids really hard, more than most. Those skids were battered and destroyed, and I started to think about what those skids looked like when that truck was done, when I was done with it. There were some gouges as deep as an 1/8 inch into the bottoms of those skids. They were misshapen, and they were 3/16 steel. Some stout skid plates, and they were deformed, gouged, just tore up. If I'm going to do that again, aluminum's not going to take that beating. Not to mention, just an off-road performance aspect is, when you get planted on a skid, you need to be able to slide. Aluminum is not a slidey material. Aluminum, aside from the fact that the surface will dig in, it's a soft material and you'll dig in, it just has kind of a less sliding nature to it. I'm losing track of any kind of terminology that'll help me out here, but make this clearer. But it doesn't slide very well, and that's one of the key things you really need out of the skids. So I went with the steels from RCI. They're 3/16, just like the previous skids I had on the other truck. Skids on that thing were Manafray / Expeditioneers. They were absolutely amazing skids. And to talk about the design of these skids, they're very similar in their 3-piece, 3-segment approach, similar to the Manafray skids, with also the addition of a cross member behind the transfer case, so that the transfer skid is supported at both ends. Yeah, another point why the steel over the aluminum, and for the strength. I know I've seen some people say they've chosen aluminum because they're just not getting into that kind of stuff. The nature of a lot of our trips, one of the things we really like doing is going into the unknown. They're not trails that we know what they're like. They're not trails that anybody else has been on. They're not trails that we got off of some guide or taking cues and points and tracks even off of someone else's trip. More often than not, it's what's in this void of wilderness, and just going off of Google Earth or going off of various maps, picking a route, laying our own routes into the GPS software, plotting that out, and then going out and seeing what we get. A lot of times it's fantastic. A lot of times it's, well, this trail's a bit much, let's divert and go around this. And sometimes it gets us into terrain that we don't get to decide. Easy versus really difficult. So because we're going into a lot more unknowns, we just need maximum protection, because we may have to bounce around some obstacles that are just brutal, and we don't have the choice to say, well, I mean, we could probably get to one of those obstacles and turn around and back out. Sometimes there's an obstacle we absolutely can't drive over, and we have to turn around and back out. But if it's, we could drive this, I do not want to be hamstrung by, we could drive this, but I don't have good enough armor for this. We have to turn around and get out of here. Things that I really, really liked, I absolutely loved. As I said, the similarities are fantastic. There is a feature on the RCI skids that I find to be far superior to what Manfrey did, and that is on the front skid, about midway on the engine, right about in line. If you see me keep looking over there, I'm looking at the truck and looking at the skids. It helps me think. Right about in line with the lower control arms, two tube structures basically rise up out of the surface of the skid plate up to contact with the frame, and that's sort of a midpoint bolting there. The old Manfrey skids and a lot of skids don't do that. Even the RCI aluminums don't do that. Those tubular towers are going to add a tremendous amount of support to that skid plate. Kind of a couple down points on the design. I don't think this is RCI's fault. I think this is the KDSS system's fault. Because of the shapes and the some of the things going on with the skids, the sway bar is a bit lower. What I would have liked to have seen, what I enjoyed with my last truck, was that skid came to right at the fronts of the upper control arms and then angled sharply up to meet below the radiator and the back of the bumper. These don't do that. These kind of continue flat. Can we see my hand? Continue flat till pretty much the end, and then angle pretty much straight up. So I'm losing a little bit of between the tires, between the axles approach. I'd say I'm losing out on maybe an inch worth of clearance there. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it's a minor thing that I was looked at and went, The old skids were a little cooler this way. They'd ramp rather than butt up against some obstacle. Time will tell on the trail. I haven't had the chance, of course, to get into those just yet. To really apply these skids to anything, and it's going to take a couple of years to know. The carriage bolts that are supporting that are mounting the very back edge of the transfer skid, they're the only exposed bolts that don't have a protective ring welded on around them. Those could get sheared off. They may get sheared off. If they do, they're easily replaced. Carriage bolts are 25 cents a piece at Home Depot. Easy fix, easy replacement. I doubt it would kind of really be a mysterious freak of nature to bust all 3 carriage bolts in one trip and have a skid plate flopping around. That last rear skid plate flopping around in the breeze. I don't think that's going to happen. If I lose one, it's easily replaced. And there might be some advantage to not putting those rings on. I'm actually just thinking about that right now. Had they welded protection around that, those could be hitch points, hook points on rocks. The installation was pretty straightforward. I did it by myself at night because it's August in Phoenix, and it was, I believe that day it was around 109, 110. Started at 8:30, probably really got moving by about 9 p.m. And it was still, you'll see in some of the video, soaking wet, absolutely. And it's that time of year where the humidity's up a little bit. And high humidity for Phoenix is 10-15%. But we feel it. So, did it at night by myself, and it still was fairly straightforward. I did the old skids the same way too. Not a bad idea to have help. They get heavy, they get hard to move around, and there's a lot of things that you do on one side of the truck and then have to go to the other side of the truck. With 2 people, that would go by a lot quicker. A lot of the overlap, a skid will slot in behind another skid against the bolts that are already in place, holding the back of that previous skid. Well, doing it by myself, there was a lot of, I have this side slotted over those bolts. Now I've got to go around to the other side, slot that over the bolts, and the other side would slip out. God damn it, now I got to go around the other side and set this all up again. Because everything has to be really loose to get all that to happen, so they can slide around a bit. Use a floor jack. You are not picking these up by yourself. If you're doing it with 2 people, use a floor jack. The 2 of you would wind up wrestling with these. I didn't weigh them, and I don't know if RCI even has that spec, and I haven't looked it up because I don't care that much. But I think overall they're probably 150 pounds. The front skid being the largest and therefore the heaviest. You're not picking that up by yourself to get it installed. A floor jack is going to be absolutely required, a floor jack, even with 2 people, you're not picking them up and putting them in place. You probably can with the cross member. You probably can with the transfer case skid. Both of those solo, you're not doing without a floor jack to lift that stuff up. Real straightforward though. You work front to back, put the front up, leave everything loose so it can wiggle around in a line, leave it hanging enough that you can get the skid under there, get the next skid tucked under the skid in front of it, and work front to back that way. When you're all done and everything's not going to fall out anymore, get it all, what I like to do is get everything hiked as much forward as possible, starting from the front, get that hiked forward, That way everything's got maximum overlap. And it's as secure as it can be. That's so anyway, it was straightforward in that regard. Going by their instructions, the instructions were very good and most of the time very clear. There were a couple of mistakes I made where I got confused. I said, I don't like this. I don't like the way this is going together. This is a hokey design. That's just me talking in the middle of the damn night while I'm incredibly uncomfortable from the heat, pouring sweat, drinking. I think I drank a gallon of water that night. But then I would look at the instructions and find, oh, yeah, there's a little detail that when I pre-read the instructions, didn't have the frame of reference for that to make sense. Now it makes sense. They did say that. I was doing it wrong. Went back, got it right. One thing that I didn't like about the installation that got a little unclear in the instructions, those diagonal tubes that are about midway on the skids. They kind of start forward on the outside of the frame rails and go inbound and rearward. The Manfrey skids completely deleted those. Whatever support they're giving to the frame is replaced by the existence and the structure of the skid plate itself, so that those tubes aren't needed. Well, assuming and seeing so many similarities, when I went in and I saw the instructions said remove bolts and discard, I removed the whole damn thing, the tubular supports, and chucked them aside, and all 8 bolts. Then put the skids up and was noticing some weird fitment problem. Went back and looked at the instructions again. They say remove 4 bolts and discard. Probably what they mean is discard those 4 bolts, not the things that they're holding up. Because then once I install the skids on top of that rearward portion of that structure, of that support tube, then everything lines up right. Overall, it would have been easier just to delete those things. They snag, they crush real easy. In the time I've had this truck, because I haven't had skids, I've been careful to not engage the undercarriage hardly at all. At some point, though, one of those tubes got itself crushed, and it did that without me even knowing it. I can't think when I've been middle of the chassis against some sort of obstacle, bouncing on it. That's how easily those things get dented. It would have been easier just to delete them. And I may at some point put spacers in that place. I also don't like what they're bolting against. If the 2 bolts go in, and then there's a little shape of sheet metal. It's not even done well, but that's how factories do things. Just folded down tangs of sheet metal to protect those bolt heads, which they didn't. Whatever put the big crushing dent in one of those tubes also took a big scuff across one of those protectors and put some massive burrs on one of those bolt heads. That I couldn't get a socket on that bolt until I pounded a wrench onto it just to mash the burrs out. Then the socket would go on and come out. So my complaint there, if I can get back to my point, is those flimsy little folded down tabs of protection are what the skids are bolted up against. Those 2 overlapping transmission and transfer case skids are bolted up against that little protecty tang thingy. So I wasn't fond of that bit. I think they should have just compensated for that, and well, deleted those diagonal structure tubes completely and adjusted the fit accordingly. RCI should have. Maybe they'll see this and maybe they'll think I'm completely full of shit, or maybe they'll go, dude might have a point. Because best I can tell, what those diagonal pieces are doing is protecting or supporting that cross member. That's the transfer case cross member part of the original frame. If something were to snag it and try pulling it to the rear, bend it to the rear, those are supporting it. They're giving it some structure against a rearward force hitting that cross member, and probably even forces in both directions, but a forward-backward impact against that cross member, providing it a little strength. Once the skid is bolted to it, the skid will do that work. When that cross member is hanging in space all by itself, yeah, those diagonal supports may be needed. I can't really see them being that strong, because they're not massively structural pieces. But anyway, that is that. Yeah, as far as the things where I say the instructions could have been a little bit more clear, again, I say there were two places where I had a little bit of trouble and went back and looked at the instructions. One of them was all me. I was the dumbass. The other was a little bit of unclarity on RCI's part. What else? Looking at my notes. And that little turkey pan of a stock skid is not protecting anything. It might protect, like if a bird got up under there or a squirrel at 70 miles an hour. Plus, I also still not fully accustomed to talking into a camera, so I keep looking at the little screen that's pointed at me instead of right into the lens like this. Eat from a jet boil. Now I'm just rambling because now I'm off notes. See how that works? Even when I was on notes, I was kind of bouncing around. That's about it. Hopefully, if you're considering skid plates and the RCIs are on your radar and you looked at this because of that, I hope this helped. Absolutely. Thanks for watching.